Today we're going to talk about completing the square in order to solve equations. In the last section, you solved equations that were perfect squares. You did this by isolating the perfect square and then taking the square root of both sides. Notice the examples to the right. Right here. Let's look at this equation, w squared plus w minus 3 equals 0. Well, it doesn't look like we can factor it very easily, and if we move the 3 to the other side, it's not going to factor into a perfect square. So what are we going to do? Well, let's remember that all perfect square trinomials factor into a perfect square. For example, the x squared plus the 14x plus the 49 can be factored into the quantity of x plus 7 quantity squared. So how about if we just turn that equation into a perfect square trinomial? Remember, whatever you do to the left side, you do to the right side. Here's our equation. Let's move the 3 to the other side by adding 3 to both sides and open up some space. In that space, we're going to take b. The coefficient b is the coefficient of the w term, and that coefficient is 1. If we take 1/2 of it and square it and add it in that blank space, we must do the same thing to the other side. Now the left side is a perfect square trinomial of w. We can square w plus 1/2 and come back to w squared plus w plus 1/4. Remember, whatever you do to the left side, you had to do to the right side. So the right side becomes 3 1/4, which is 13/4. Now, let's take the square root of both sides. The square root of this is w plus 1/2, and the square root of 3 1/4 is the same thing as the square root of 13/4, which is the square root of 13/2. Subtracting 1/2 from both sides, here we go. W equals negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 13/2. We need to take both positive and negative square roots there. Simplifying this, you can see the answer over here. Now here's another example to walk through. 2x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. Well, let's write the original equation. And we need to bring the constant to the right side. So the only thing on the left side would be the 2x squared minus x. In order to complete a square, the coefficient of x squared must be 1. So we're going to divide each side by the coefficient a, which is 2. And we get x squared minus 1/2 x equals 1. Now let's open up that equation on the left side and take 1/2 of b. b is negative 1/2. Half of that is negative 1/4, and we square it. And whatever we do to the left side, we're going to do to the right side. And negative 1/2 squared is 1/16. You can see the 1/16 added to the right. And there we have it. Now, the left side is now a perfect square trinomial, which we can factor into the difference into a binomial squared. X minus 1/4 quantity squared. If you multiply that out, you will go back to, get my pointer here, you will go back to x squared minus 1/2 x minus 1/4 squared. If you're not sure about that, write it out and do it, okay? And that's going to equal 17/6. Now we can take the square root of both sides. The left side becomes x minus 1/4, and the right side is the square root of 17 over 4, and we must make that a plus or minus. Adding 1/4 to both sides, we get 1/4 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 4. And there you have the solutions.